The meeting will come to order at 6:34 p.m. And do we have public participants this evening, Tiffany?
No one signed up.
No one signed up. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to the first order of business here. Discuss electing a 2021 board chair and vice chair.
Yep. So every year the chair and vice chair, it's only a 1-year term. So every January we're going to have to nominate someone and then second the nomination, and then we're all going to have to vote. The board can, just to clarify, the board can nominate Jeff and Todd. And I guess, does anyone want to make any statements before we go on with nominations?
Hey, Tiffany, just a quick, before we do that, can we approve the minutes after this section?
Yeah, we'll approve the minutes after.
All right, thank you.
So, anybody have any statements?
I move to nominate Jeff to be chair again and Todd to be vice chair.
And I second.
All right.
You second both?
Yes, second both.
It's actually two motions.
Yep.
All right. Can everyone raise their hand if they're for that? If they're voting yes.
Well, wait, we have two motions.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yep. You're right. Voting for Jeff to be chair. Can everyone raise their hand if they're voting yes? Okay.
Should I vote?
You may vote. You may vote.
All right. And then can we get a vote for Todd for vice chair? All right. So Jeff and Todd will be chair and vice chair.
Congratulations, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you.
I really appreciate to accept this nomination, Patrick. You're just doing a lot, man. No, thank you, man.
Congratulations on a very tough and hard-won victory. The competition was fierce for you guys.
Well, I want to say this board is, I just love working with everybody. I love the participation, and I really appreciate the chance to continue into 2021. I can't wait to see what we do this year.
Amen.
Okay, so let's move along to meeting minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes as distributed in December? These minutes are for the December 7th meeting. Any issues or corrections with those minutes? I hear no issues. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the December 7th meeting?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve, and Patrick seconds. So we have a motion to approve the minutes of December 7th. That motion has been seconded. Those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, please show of hands. Do we have anyone opposed? So we have a motion to approve the minutes, and the motion carries. So we have approved the minutes for December 7th. And our next order of business is we wanted to start the year off with, in fact, I think it's probably more accurate to say that we're required to start the year off with some administrative items. And the first administrative item is to go back over the Open Meetings Act. We have Kaylin and Aaron with us now. I'm going to assume that Kaylin and Aaron have gone through the OMA educational material. So at this point, everybody on the board has done that, but we thought it'd be to get a refresher. And Ashley Owens is here to talk to us about the Open Meetings Act, tell us if there's anything new we should consider, and just make sure that we don't have any unanswered questions. So Ashley, would you want to speak to us about OMA a bit here?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff and Jared and Todd and Tiffany and all of you that are here tonight. If you don't know, my name is Ashley Owens. I'm the city secretary for the city of Coppell. I've just recently moved into this role in October. So last year you all met Crystal and spoke with her at this time last year. But we just wanted to give you kind of an overview of the OMA. I know that everybody has taken the Attorney General's training that is done online, but just wanted to go over any sort of issues that might come up throughout the year, such as I know everybody likes to hit the reply all email whenever an email goes out, and that is, I just want to caution everybody against something like that, because that is definitely considered a walking quorum and can get us into trouble when it comes to the OMA. So if you do get an email from Tiffany or you get an email from Jared, make sure that you reply directly to them. That just keeps everything up in order with the OMA. Also, talking about emails, it is all of those, your emails to Jared, to Tiffany, those types of things, those are subject to the Public Information Act. So if somebody were to put in a request for all emails regarding the Smart City Board, those emails would be disclosed in that request. Another thing that is, kind of a hot topic is definitely when subcommittees are used. I know that a lot of boards use subcommittees, and that's perfectly acceptable. And that's why we keep them to a minimum of 4. Actually, you have a quorum of 4, so it would need to be less than 4 for a subcommittee. So those types of interactions with your subcommittee members are perfectly fine. It's just when it comes to, again, an email that is more than 4 people involved, that's where we get into the PIA. Also, just wanted to talk about, I know that Jeff and Todd and Jared meet to discuss the agenda and the creation of agenda items. And in the bylaws, it does state that those 3 folks are can create the agenda as well as put items up for request. And also, your board members are allowed to request items to be placed on the agendas. Same thing if there was a citizen that wanted to hear a certain type of topic discussed at a meeting, that would just be sent to Jared, and Jared, Todd, and Jeff would then discuss the need or the discretion to put it on the agenda. So, I'm kind of talking fast. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, Ashley, would you mind, just for the whole group at the same time, just reiterate what the definition of what it takes to become an official meeting, right? So it's 4 people. Will you just, reinforce what that means and how that works for us? Most of us that work in the business mode, that becomes something new and kind of weird to figure out. So you mind just kind of talking through that again?
Sure. So anytime there is a quorum that is met, so again, we're talking about 4 or more people, an agenda must be posted 72 hours prior to the meeting. So that means that there has to be an agenda that is built for that meeting. There has to be a list of items that will be discussed at that meeting. And then obviously it must be posted somewhere for the public to be able to see. And in our case, we do maintain a website. So it would need to be posted on a website as well as posted on our bulletin board at the at Town Center. So we're just talking about really transparency in all purposes. This is, you are a council appointed board. So that means that those that any type of business that is being held in the name of that board must be posted and public and accessible for the public to be able to see. Does that answer your question, Todd?
Yeah, and same thing for emails, that if there's a reply all, or if 4 of us started an email chain, that literally would become a meeting.
Yes, that's exactly why we advise against replying all in the case of an email, because that is considered a walking quorum. So just imagine if, I think the scenario that I always think of whenever a walking quorum comes into play is if we were holding a reception. So literally this year we weren't able to hold our boards and commissions reception where we would have invited you all. But when I think of a walking quorum, it's that when a reception is being held, and obviously there are council members, there are board members that are going to be present, but they are there in the case of a public event that is meant to be in celebration of something. They are not there to discuss business. However, if they were to break off into a group and start discussing council business or board business, and there are 4 or more of them, that's where it gets into the case of we're subject to the Public Information Act and we are in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So that's where you just always want to try to think about it in the case of if we're discussing something that the citizens would like to be aware of, or we need to make citizens aware of, that's where you want to stray away from unless it's posted on an agenda. So I know another, because you all have a Smart City Board, you all have a SharePoint file that you all use, or a SharePoint group that you all use. And I think that is absolutely awesome. You guys are bleeding edge in terms of how boards are ran. But I just wanted to caution, I guess, give a word of caution against any sort of open or working documents that are in that SharePoint file. Now, if you are wanting to drop an article that you all find interesting, or an article that you want Jared to read, or an article that you want your fellow members to read, that is perfectly acceptable, because that is a final think of it as a final document. The document's not going to be edited or changed. When it comes to the case of a Word document that you want to all start, where all of you are able to chime in. Mr.
Sorry, I work for a public university here in the area. I know exactly what these rules are, and I know you can't do that.
Yeah, so exactly. So that is not, I would not advise that a working drafted document be, utilized when it comes to sharing ideas or coming up with topics at a citizen summit, or something like that. That is something that you all would want to discuss in a posted open meeting. So it's perfectly acceptable to if you came up with an idea and you thought you were going to forget it, shoot Jared an email. He can archive it in his emails, get it ready for the next meeting with Jeff and Todd, and that's perfectly acceptable. But you just don't want to get to a point where you are discussing things amongst each other without a posted agenda. So that is this one of the more one of those things that seems to happen a lot. I'll just say that.
Hey, Ashley, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry to go back to this, but later in this meeting, we're going to talk. One of our board members brought up the idea of having subcommittee meetings separate from the main board meeting. And in the subcommittee meeting, And the reasoning behind it, I think, is, well, there's a lot of work to do. So if you can have subcommittees, then those subcommittees can go deep on one of these many topics that's important to the board, and then come back to the board meeting with that topic fleshed out. And I don't know, we could go through, what's it mean to flesh it out? Well, there could be deliberation that goes along with that fleshing out of the topic in that subcommittee meeting. So while I don't know where we will get to on that conversation later in this board meeting, what I hear you saying is that if that subcommittee was a subcommittee of 3, that could occur without violating OMA, even if there were conversations that were of a nature that would be deliberation, it would be okay so long as it was brought back to the public board meeting and presented to the full board. Is that an accurate?
Jeff, I'm going to back up here, and I'm going to let Ashley weigh in as well, and so can Jared. But I raised this in an earlier email about this, whether this is even in order for us to discuss.
Yeah.
And I think part of this conversation was going whether or not what I raised in an email is even in order to discuss or not.
So maybe I don't understand what you just said, Patrick. When you say, what do you mean by order?
What he's suggesting is because we're kind of meshing 2 agenda items together.
Correct.
And
and you haven't publicized one of them. I don't know if it's in order, and I will defer to Jeff and Ashley whether that's in order. I appreciate Moshe raising the earlier item to add to the agenda, but you can't do it within 72 hours of the meeting.
Okay. So, Ashley, let me simply ask then, we had last year a conversation about this, about subcommittees, if you will. And where we got to was we were concerned that subcommittees of
Jeff, I think you're out of agenda right now. I would ask you to please stay on agenda.
Can I ask a question to clarify?
Yes, but I would ask you to stay on agenda. So it's a clarification to Ashley, please.
Yes, and what I'm asking for clarification on is your statement was a meeting that is a meeting that's separate from the main board meeting. That is, for this board, 3 members would not violate the OMA.
That is correct.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions about, the Open Meetings Act or even the Public Information Act? What is subject to, what is not? I don't want to take up too much of you all's time. If there ever is a question, please do not hesitate to shoot Jared an email. Jared knows where I am. You can get in contact with me. Also, please feel free to reach out directly. I'll loop Jared in. We can all have the same answer to the same question. So please do let me know if anybody has anything.
Okay. Ashley, thank you for being here this evening.
Of course.
Ashley, I'm assuming that you're going to get off the call now. Before Ashley does that, does anybody have any other questions of Ashley? Okay. Ashley, thank you very much.
Of course. You all have a good night.
Good night.
Okay, very good. Okay, any other commentary on that conversation about the OMA? Okay, so let's move to the next item. The next item is we want to welcome our new board members. We have Aaron and Kaylin with us. Hey, Todd, do you want to kind of take us through this item?
Yeah, so first of all, Kaylin and Aaron, we're really appreciate and glad you joined us. We've got a really, I didn't mean to make this a pun, but we got smart people on the smart board, which is awesome. And we're heading in a really cool direction, which is great. So I just wanted to, so everybody can get to know you guys just a little bit better, is just tell us, tell us a little bit about yourself, what made you interested in serving this way, and then maybe kind of what you do for a living, and does that tie in technology wise? Just kind of give us an idea like what you do. Aaron, I'll start with you because you're left on my screen.
Got it. So I'm a lawyer. I do exclusively family law. I own a law firm in Plano, Pogdaniel Family Law. So that's kind of what I do. As far as what was your other question, Todd?
Oh, just why the Smart City Board, why you were interested in volunteering.
So the Smart City Board, I feel like, is probably the future of where we're going. There's lots of other cities around us that do smart cities and utilize those type of technologies. So that's kind of why I feel like, there's a lot of things that we've done in the past, and I kind of wanted to be involved with what we do in the future. So that's kind of why that. A little bit about me. I grew up in Coppell. I lived here from 83 to 2000, when did I graduate? 1. And then moved back about 5 years ago. So from Coppell, lived here my whole life. Thought I'd never come back, but yet here I am. So Coppell bred, which, I care about what happens with the city and want to make sure it goes in the right direction. So obviously that's why I ran for city council and just kind of want to be involved in any aspect I can be for the future. To see, kind of where it goes and have that perspective. Because when I moved here, Dentac was a 1-lane road and Sandy Lake was a dirt road. So I kind of have that background. Like I said, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for 12-ish years, over 12 years now. So that's kind of, I think, the background that I'll bring to it as far as the legal aspect of things, which can always be helpful. You always need a lawyer on board, right?
Yeah, always need a lawyer. Well,
you hate lawyers until you need one. I guess that's the saying. So
that's right. We're glad you're here. So, Kaylin, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Awesome. So tell us a bit about yourself, Kaylin.
Okay, I'm really glad to be here. I've lived in Coppell 2 years next month, but I grew up and graduated from high school in the DFW area. I went to school in Denton. So I'm familiar with Coppell, but I've only lived here 2 years, and I am interested in the board and joined the board for kind of the same reasons as what my career is. So I'll kind of talk about both those things together. But I work so my background is economics, but applied economics. So modeling, looking forward, trying to predict various things. So I started out helping like restaurants and retailers and cities identify which businesses and restaurants, retailers, medical practices were the best fit for their constituents, or, if it's the restaurant, which street corner should they go to, which co-tenant should they have, that kind of thing. And then I worked later for Boy Scouts, helping them with a bunch of their data. There are millions of volunteers and Boy Scouts, and doing analysis on that. And now for the last 8 years, I've worked for an analytics company. We build software to do analytics. So I know the power of data, and I know how to get data and work with data and try to look towards the future and to make smarter decisions. And I think I'm really excited to see that Coppell was already doing that, and like the vision for 2040, like Aaron said, like looking to the future. So I love Coppell. Every time I learn something new about it, I really like living here, and I want to stay here, and I want other people to want to live here, and I want them to want to stay here. And I'm just really excited to use all the information we have about our city and our surrounding cities and global information, and make this the best city in DFW and Texas, hopefully.
Yeah, that is awesome. You probably saw some people kind of sit up in their seats when you started talking about the power of data and analytics, because we've had plenty of those kind of discussions. Ramesh, I see you just smiling and ready to just say, welcome.
Yes, welcome to another data miner in the group.
That's right.
Yep, allowed to have one more nerd.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, we're really, really excited that both of you are joining us. You've got a great year ahead. So anyway, welcome, and look forward to getting to know you guys better. Jeff, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Kaylin and Aaron, before we move on to the next item, I'm assuming that you have had sufficient information about what the board accomplished in 2020. You got the city council presentation, and I'm assuming you got materials to help you to get started in the board this year. Is that right?
They're nodding, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any questions that you want to ask of the board about that material or about anything that was accomplished in 2020?
Not right now. I'm sure I will as we go, but.
Okay, Kaylin?
Not about the material per se, but something that came up last meeting. Just a question about how we move forward potentially with various things kind of in this current environment. So I look forward to kind of, how much delay will we have being only virtual? You guys talk about talking to the city. How can we do that? So I have questions about applying some of the stuff I read, but no questions about the material yet. Okay.
Well, I think that's a question that we all probably are kind of wondering about and thinking through, and we'll need to address. So that's a good question. Okay. Anything else that we want to cover in terms of the new board members? Any other items? Okay. So let's move on to the next item of business, which is to discuss future IQ scenario planning. This is something we had conversation about in our last meeting, and what I'd like to do is a couple of things. One is Patrick brought up a couple of items in regards to the scenario planning and the engagement with Future IQ. And Patrick, I think that the items that you brought up were twofold. One was that the expenditure should be looked upon as this time period should be looked upon as a sensitive time period during COVID for that particular expenditure. And then I think the second thing is your feeling that was due to COVID, that the board should seek a better time for that engagement. Now would not be the time. Is that relatively accurate?
So it's funny. I actually finished a conversation earlier today with one of my colleagues at UT Dallas who studies fiscal policy in cities. And I asked her specifically about this. And she agreed with both of my points. And so one part of this is, do you agree with the cost of doing this? And I have my sensitivities to this. At the end of the day, it's up to the city council to agree to the cost. Given what I saw the costs are and what I know it costs for consulting, and Jared can get in and talk about this, we could look at other consultants for this. I think there's other ways to do this. The other one, though, that I think is the bigger issue is, we as a board have not had a whole lot of civic engagement, right? We've not been able to meet in council chambers. We've not been able to have open meetings. We've not been able to get that input from the regular public that would normally come in for our meetings when we would do this, if we were doing them in the council chambers or we were doing them in the other chambers for the city and the meeting space we would have. And we're now 13 months into this board's existence, and we've had no civic input in 13 months. And that concerns me. The political scientist in me, and I'm a political scientist by training, I have a PhD in it, it concerns me a lot that we haven't had any civic input that directly says anything from the public. Now, granted, we're in extraordinary times and the rest of it. That said, there's other ways to get input, whether it's we go and consult other smart city councils that are existing in the area and figure out how those are working. There's other things about dealing with getting information about sustainable cities. And I think we're at the spot where, for me, it's really hesitant for me to make a lot of recommendations about some of this stuff without having that civic input. And I think that's really important to where we're going on this. I mean, so there's the fiscal side that Jeff brought up, but the other is the input side, because I don't want this to be 6 or 7 people gave input to the city and suddenly the city's making a decision based on what 6 or 7 of us say.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. So one of the things that's in the scope of work that we discussed was that there would be civic engagement in that work. And I think that was the concern with the timing, is because, what would the participation be in this environment, right? And that was one of the things that I went back and asked Future IQ to give me some insight into. And he said he'd be willing to come discuss this with us. So if we wanted to have him come kind of
No, I don't want him to come and discuss it with us. I want his plan of what he's going to do. Of if we go to sorry, let me back this up. So having done the 2040 visioning thing. So sorry, I know the spaces you have to work with. He knows the spaces he has to work with. He has the Cosby Library. He has the space at North Lake. He has the space at the high school. He has the space in the city council chambers. He physically knows the spaces he has. He can plan how many people he can invite in and the rest of it under social distancing. I don't need him to come here and talk to you, Jared, about what needs to be done. He knows the layout. You can get him the dimensions of the layout. Why doesn't he design that and give you a bid based on the physical spaces he's already visited the last 2 years?
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. So for tonight's topic, what I'm trying to get clarity at is, do you want that to happen? Does the board agree that this work is important and we should move forward? And because really we didn't take action one way or the other last time. We ended up on a topic of a delay, and I'm here to support you guys. So if we want to delay, great. If we want to get more clarity on the scope, great. But that's ultimately what I'm trying to get from this topic.
Jared, let me ask the other one, which is there was another board that was also asking. The Ford board was asking, have they gone forward to ask for Future IQ?
So now we're getting into the cadence of meeting. They were anticipating going forward at the last council meeting following our recommendation. But when we did not make a recommendation, they also paused. And so now we pulled the item from the last agenda.
So they didn't make a recommendation either.
No. And part of the reason is we started to go back, Mindy and I. Mindy is the staff representative.
Correct. I know Mindy.
There are two physically separate scopes of work. Yet, if we were going to have surveys that went out, it makes sense to do them together. And so we started talking about how that would work if we separated the two things. There would be questions that are related, not necessarily. Anyway, so that was some of the conversation that Mindy and I had. Their board also had questions around the participation piece, and that's why they added their scope is actually increased over ours because of that concern to allow for more virtual meetings.
Let me put my social scientist hat on here, which is okay. So are they asking for surveys over focus groups or focus groups over surveys?
They were asking for. Let me see if I can find. It was both those questions, and the question was which would be better in this time. If we were to go forward today, it would most likely be the online participation, which is what we were anticipating. But again, that's.
And then that raises. Sorry, and Todd, you may be able to weigh in some here, like you and Aaron and some other people. I mean, if we're gonna do this all with surveys, it's a lot harder to do this with surveys in a small area like we're doing than what we would do normally. Because normally we would do public hearings and we would do focus groups and the rest. So I'm really concerned about getting the right public feedback on this.
Look, could we do this? I think there's two things here. One is that I believe the intent of the board out of the last meeting was to delay any engagement with Future IQ, but not to cancel it. And I think first thing we need to do is to clarify that. And I think probably the best way to do that is to take a vote, because I think what we need to establish is that the opinion of the board or the direction of the board is to delay based upon the conversation that we had. Patrick has brought up some issues that we should delay any kind of an engagement until we can get those issues resolved. The second thing is we have, and this is something we started talking about, I feel like last year, fairly early on, we have a task in front of us, and that is to advise City Council on the right actions to take, or what we feel are the best actions to take to develop Coppell as a smart city between now and 2040. And scenario planning of the ilk that a design firm like Future IQ does is an important input to that process. But I am concerned, and I believe one reason that it's not a bad idea to delay is to allow the board to dig into that more, to dig into that statement, to dig into those portfolios, to look more closely at what has to be created to fully articulate our recommendations on those portfolios, so that then we can see where scenario planning comes in and how generating planning assumptions for those portfolios is important. Then we can decide whether or not we believe Future IQ can help by creating the scenarios that will drive those planning assumptions. So I think what I'd like to do is make sure that we're all together on the delay, and then we can go forward and we can work together to really understand where Future IQ may have value, and we may move forward here and we may not be able to come together that Future IQ has value. I think it does, but I think these topics, these items that are being brought up in terms of what's the best venue for getting that public input, because I mean, my personal view is going through that scenario development process in a manner that looks a lot more like that first Future IQ engagement rather than something that's virtual is more valuable, and it makes more sense. So for that reason, a delay is not a bad idea.
Jeff, could I just ask for clarity real quick?
Yeah.
You basically just said there's two buckets of information for us to be thinking about. One bucket is, does the board...
He made two motions. You can't make two motions. You can only make one.
I don't know if he made a motion or he was just discussing.
I wasn't making a motion.
Sorry. I got confused. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think Jeff was just trying to make sure from your input, Patrick, just to kind of bucket into the discussion. So I'm kind of hearing that, to your point, Jeff, just for clarity, I'm hearing that we as a board need to make a recommendation through a vote that we officially think it's smart, and our recommendation is to delay, right? I think Jared has asked that of us, or would like that from us. Probably a better way to say it.
Yes.
The second point to me is probably the thing that is going to take a lot more discussion, but like the ability for us to determine what's the correct cost. I don't think that's our job. I think that's Jared's job. I think we need to decide. I think we're called to decide. These are the things that, from what we see as a board, we're going to need help, right? And so, hey, Jared, we know we're going to need help. You've got all the experience in the city world. I just don't think our job is to go through cost procurement and decide this is. Anyway, Jared would need to ask us for that. I just don't think that's our role. I may be confused, but I don't think it is. Anyway, I'm just looking for some clarity around that.
What I will tell you is this is a very unique situation. So typically what would happen in a normal budget scenario is if you guys if we had been talking about this and you said, Jared, can pursue a scope of work with a vendor to do X work, the cost normally would not necessarily be talked about here. It would be the scope that we were talking about and what we're trying to achieve. And then whether we do a bid process, however we go to get to the final proposal, council would ultimately be the one that would recommend that cost or approve that cost. Jared, as a staff employee, would make a recommendation to the council saying, based on the discussions I've had with the board, this is the scope of work we're looking for. We believe this work is important. Here's where the money would come from. Here's all those things that I would do to prepare the council for that decision. The board is a little bit unique in this scenario because it is not a currently funded scenario. So if I would have said, if I'd had this scope of work and so the cost that we have today it's $20,000. So if we were all still said, yeah, we're ready to go forward, and I took it to council on a normal scenario where I'd put that into my budget to do, and they approved the annual budget, that work would then go forth without a necessary action from this board. So it's a little bit of a gray area because I've asked for a formal recommendation because it is not in the current budget. And to ask council for that money, it would be pulling from undesignated fund balance of 20K to move into the current year fund for me to go forward with that project. So it's a little bit of a different scenario than we would normally operate under, where I would ask you for a fiscal consideration. It is just the work that you guys have identified, the scope of work that I put together with David, Future IQ, came back with a proposal. We came to you guys to say, are you guys good with it? And then we asked some questions. Specifically, one was fiscal related. The other was the scope and how we would get the engagement. And so we left that meeting with the notion of delay, but we didn't make a motion to delay. We didn't make a vote to delay. It was kind of, so the question was from my boss, so what are we doing? And so I'm looking for you guys to help me answer that question of, if we are going to delay, great. We just need to make a motion to say we agree that the scope of work is important, but we don't believe it's a good time to do it based on those reasons. And that's fine. Or we say, okay, maybe we go ahead and move forward with this. Jared, adjust the scope of work to accommodate, or I provide the plan from David and Future IQ to the board to review as far as how the engagement would work and look like. We can do all that. I just need to know what we're doing. And so that's from my perspective, that's the clarity I'm trying to get from the board. Again, it's unique because normally from your perspective, Todd, yes, in your questions you asked, the fiscal consideration, and Patrick, you said this as well, it's up to council to approve that.
Correct.
At the end of the day, that is their job, is to approve the expenditures. So they would either do it in the normal budget process or in this case under an amendment scenario. And like I said, that's the unique case that we're in. But again, that's not the only consideration here. It was more of a consideration of the scope of work that was presented and asking how we would get the engagement to get the public feedback.
Jared, what's not clear to me is what is the scope of work that Future IQ is going to do?
Okay.
And I will say, I've dealt with David, I was part of the 2040 process and the rest. And I will put this out there. I'm very skeptical of their ability to deliver on this.
Okay.
So you're getting me as the biggest skeptic, and I'm willing to let the rest of you outvote me. Like, that's literally the spot I'm in. I will let the rest of you outvote me on this, on the whole thing.
I think that's clear, Patrick, to understand your position. Like, I was having a hard time understanding really what your position was earlier, because it was about cost. Is this the right thing?
I'm very skeptical of David as an individual to do this process for what we need for the city.
Okay, that helps me understand like the point you're raising. So that makes sense.
And this goes back to and I know this is all being recorded and the rest of it. This goes back to my land use fights I've had with the city that date back 7 years. Because David's views on some of these issues, which are not about the smart city issues, they're about other issues in the city, I do not agree with. And I'm going to put that out there, and I'm willing to be outvoted, and I'm willing to stay on this board and work with the rest of you on the other issues, but I'm willing to be outvoted on this one.
So Patrick, within the scope of what we are trying to achieve, is there anything about this Future IQ guys that you think they're not competent?
I didn't say they were incompetent. I just say I don't agree with their view about how to address us being a smart city. Because their view of us being a smart city from the discussions I had with David, and now I'm being really frank, were basically he wants us to go vertical. And that would mean we would look like, I don't know, part of the mid-cities, part of, other parts of Dallas that I don't think we want to look like. I mean, we have made certain very specific decisions that I have been part of for the last 10 years now that I've nearly lived here for about what Coppell is going to look like.
So, Patrick, my question to tag on to Ramesh's is the position that you're taking about him and the work, maybe not the work he does, but maybe kind of his vision of what smart cities are, is what you disagree with. Is that a fair way to say it?
I'll go like this, Todd. I'll go like this.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll go whelpy on you.
I think the thing that I'm trying to understand is, I think your position needs to be very, very clear, so the board can understand where you're coming from, so we can take that into our discussion. To me personally, I think we need to say, here's the scope of work of what we're attempting to do. Jared, you determine if that needs to be Future IQ or somebody else. Based on your knowledge, and then we go from there. To me, this is part of the vetting process. But I think the question of what is the scope of work and what do we want back, that's the main thing that we need to determine.
I'm going to circle this back one level lower, or one level different. Sorry, not lower, one level different. Which is, okay, Aaron, you're the Coppell native. You're trying to raise your kids here. Like, let's think about you trying to have your kids stay here. Like, do you want 10-story buildings in Coppell?
Well, my question to y'all is, who's David?
Okay, this raises a whole other issue then. Okay.
No,
my answer to your question is no, though.
If I could jump in, I think, let's not dwell on just one topic of what David's position is on multi-rise versus single family, right? To add to what Todd was saying, if our scope is deliver A, And if Future IQ is not the right vendor, since the city is footing the bill, and indirectly we are, but the city is paying the bill. Let Jared decide.
No, we're footing the bill, Ramesh. You're paying it in your taxes.
I know.
So don't say the city's paying the bill. You're paying the bill, as am I.
I acknowledge that. I said we're paying indirectly.
No, you're paying directly. You're not paying indirectly. You're paying directly.
Well, I am not paying David. That's what I meant to say. Indirectly, yes, through my taxes and all of us.
It's directly.
All right. Have we, I think, at least for the newcomers, should we go over what the scope is and then decide if it is Future IQ or someone else?
Patrick, can you give us like an overview of one, who's David? Two, what are the issues with David?
Well, it's not issues with David. It's just,
Patrick,
go ahead, Jared. Jared, I'm going to defer to you. Yes.
Yeah, let me give that scoop. So David is the consultant that we worked with. His firm is Future IQ. He's responsible for the 2040 plan that we shared with you. And based on the 2040 plan is what created ultimately this board and the Ford board. The difference being Smart City Board is responsible for smart city technology, kind of related visioning, whereas the Ford board is really related to the housing scenario, future housing that Coppell would look at. So the history, how we got on this conversation was with some of the early meetings, we discussed that 2040 fell short in actually producing a scenario for the future. It talks about here and now the people's wishes are X. And it was, he had a lot of data points. You've read all the pillars and all the things, but it doesn't really show or give an example for anybody to work towards related to a scenario for 2040. And so the advanced scenario scope is to gather data from both the board and from participants in the public, citizens, to look at what a scenario would be.
Which we haven't had.
Right. Well, correct. So that's part of the scope of the work, was to engage with the board, engage with citizens, to gather data based on trend data and research, and then provide us with what Future IQ believes that what smart city related things would look like for the Smart City Board, and Ford Board's scope was related more towards housing. So that's ultimate. So David is the consultant. David is who I've been working with on the scope of work it was attached to the last meeting, and it's also out on the site. You can pull it up if we really want to get into the weeds of that proposal. But at this point, where we left it last time, I feel like that's a draft, and we need more detail in that scope because of the kind of the discussions we've had even tonight. So that's David.
Jared, I would say not only tonight, the last meeting we had should have required more details about a proposal than what we've gotten now. And if council hasn't told you, and I'm not criticizing, don't take this as criticism of you. Don't take it as a criticism of the city manager, Mike Land, because I can go around the corner from my house because Mike lives around the corner from me, and I can knock on Mike's door and I can apologize the same way I'm going to apologize to you, which is you guys need to get council to tell you to get more detail about what we're going to do about this.
Okay. Could we see if we can kind of come to a conclusion here on this? I would like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we vote on the board's, what the board wants to do with the Future IQ engagement. I believe that what we're talking about here is delaying any engagement with Future IQ, but not canceling it. We'll come back and look at it later, but I believe that that's what we're saying. So I'd like to make a motion that we vote on delaying we're not going to approve, we're going to delay any engagement with Future IQ, but we're not going to cancel it. We will look at it again in the future, but I'd like to make a motion that we vote to delay but not cancel.
Second. Yep.
Okay, so the motion before the board is that we delay any further engagement with Future IQ, but not cancel. Can we get a show of hands on everybody that is in favor of that motion, please?
And please keep your hands up.
Kaylin, you're not on screen if you think you are, by the way.
So I am an alternate member, so I wasn't going to vote officially, but I will join the video. I'm happy to delay. I think that makes sense.
Okay. We're good.
Okay.
I would note that I did not raise my hand. I'm voting no.
Yep, got that.
Okay.
Doing that for procedural reasons that we may need later.
Okay. And Tiffany, do you have everything you need to record that vote?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And so can you state what the vote was, please?
Yep. So the motion has passed to delay Future IQ.
Okay. So
please state the votes. That's normally what they do at council. Please state the votes.
So,
Donaldson, Storch, Bogdanovich, Anderson, Aurelian, Primakar in favor, 1 against, Brandt.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. But I think, listen, I think there's the conversation here has led me to feel that there's a question that we need to answer about how we fulfill our advisory role to the city council when it comes to the portfolios. Without scenarios, what that means is it's really up to us to create those scenarios. It's really up to us to work on, debate, deliberate, have conversations about what the planning assumptions are that we would make around each portfolio between now and 2040 so that we can make reasonable advisement to the city council. And so I think that we really need to figure out how we're going to explore exactly what the board can do to create these planning assumptions so that we can advise city council. And I would suggest that basically is what our next agenda item is about. So while it probably would be, not a sharp edge kind of going to this next agenda item, I think we probably should table the debate on Future IQ since we've had the vote and move to the next agenda item. Does that sound okay to everybody? Or is there additional conversation you want to have on the Future IQ scenario planning engagement?
I think there's, if we're going to do the Future IQ thing, there's just got to be a better argument made about why and how we do it.
That's a scope of work statement, Patrick, correct?
I think it is. Because if you're going to say, okay, we're going to spend $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 to have somebody come in and do consulting during the pandemic to gather more information about these smart city issues and about the other stuff, they literally, it's not just about, like the other part I mentioned earlier was we know the venues in which we'd have them do them. Literally, it comes down to the logistics.
So that's not a scope of work for you. It is efficacy of actually achieving the scope of work is what you're now
Todd,
saying.
Todd, you've socialized with me over the last few months, right? And we've done this in ways that depend on social distancing and masks and the rest of it. And they literally, if they're going to come in and they're going to do focus groups, they're going to have to physically come in and say, how are they doing a focus group?
So the efficacy of doing the work.
Totally, yes.
Okay.
And even with the survey work, I mean, the survey work has gotten kind of screwed up too. I mean, and we know, I know people who professionally do surveys, but like for us to agree to this and recommend this to city council, I think they've got to have a solid plan of action on this. Otherwise, I just don't see how we can responsibly make the recommendation. I mean, I've got a bunch of you on here who are engineers, and I'm not hearing any recommendations from you. It's not like you're saying, "Oh, hey, we should go do this." Todd, you got your head in your hand. You're doing
actually,
this.
Patrick, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that I understand the point that you're making. And before there was some discussion about Ford, what I'm hearing you saying, which is why I'm asking for clarity, is you just want to make sure that I think you want to make sure that whoever is the consultant, forget Future IQ, whoever they are,
right,
that the work that they do is going to live up and provide the type of results that we need. That's
No. Actually, it could be, Todd. It could be Future IQ. My issue is.
I said that.
Sorry. Whoever it is, I want them to be able to come in and be in the community and get the input from the community. And honestly, right now, I mean, we're all doing our own isolation thing. And so I don't understand how they think they're going to come in and get the appropriate input for what we want and what we were talking about, for what we needed for the next steps we were trying to propose as a smart city board.
Patrick, the way I would solve that is whoever the vendor is, we'll ask them to present us with a plan. And if we think the plan will meet our requirements, then we'll choose the best vendor, right? So is that what I see you nodding. Are you agreeing to that?
No, Ramesh, I'm agreeing with you. Yes, I would like a plan. And the thing that I didn't see between our meeting last month and what we're dealing with now is, and this, sorry, Jared, this is probably what I should have said a month ago to you, was what do we get from our plan from the vendor to get the input? And I want, the social scientist, political scientist in me says, I want representative input.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because that is what I will seek to get.
And maybe Future IQ can deliver something with that. They can partner with somebody, whatever. But I want to know at the end of the day, I mean, we're a town of 50,000 plus people. Representative input is around, let's think what votes in a city council / school board election. Aaron, you probably can tell me what the number is. It's what, about 3,000 people?
Right. But we also have 42,000 total.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's plus or minus the school board, the school district versus the other varies, but yes. Get us a representative input. And that's the thing I really care about on this.
But I also don't think that has to be in person, Patrick. I imagine there is the technological way to do that without being in person.
No, it doesn't have to be in person, but the technological piece, Aaron, that you need to be able to get it where it's not in person is actually quite sophisticated, because it requires these plus the laptops we're on plus other devices and the other stuff, but it can be done. And I know people who do this. I know people who do this all over Britain. So it's doable. But
I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you, Patrick, that we need that or want that. I think we're all in agreement that it has to be. We all agree with that. I mean, there's no other discussion.
That's the big part I want.
Then my other thought is, if David or whoever David is doing what we're asking him to do, then does that affect your position on David? I mean, because he's not going to go rogue and just do what he wants to do, right? We govern what he does, or no?
That would be on me.
Yeah.
That would be on Jared. That would be on
then
Jared.
Jared's not going to let him go like a crazy person.
Right. Yeah, and if we honestly, if we felt like the data that he presented or came back with wasn't representative of the participation that we saw or were engaged with him on, then we wouldn't even bring it to you any further. We would stop it. We'd stop
that
it.
if you're willing to do that level with David, I'm okay.
And I'll say this, on any contract that I work on, that I've ever worked on, I make sure that they deliver what we have asked for in the scope every time. So anyway, that's my point of view on contracts. I'm happy to go forward and get that for you. I will ask the question, since we agreed to delay via the motion. Are we interested in having a future agenda item where we get that proposal information from the vendor, or you would like for me to present that to you?
So Jared, my 2 cents are that since we are all passionate about this, maybe we need to specify what we would like to see. Maybe I'm just spitballing here. Are we saying you have to talk to 500 people and they should belong to the following education level, economic strata, what have you? Do we have that specifics that we want to put there and then ask him, hey, can you do better than this?
Well, Ramesh, this is something that I'm concerned about, because we're having this conversation and we're very focused on public input. We should place tremendous value on public input, but public input is one. It's a significant, but it's still only one part of doing scenario planning. And if the scenario planning is completed only by surveying the public, you won't get decent scenarios. You have to have significant research, and you have to establish trends, and you have to establish what is likely to happen. And then once you establish that, then you need to get public input on it. But what I'm concerned about is I don't want to, if we focus only on the public input, we miss the fact that you have to do scenario planning and you have to establish planning assumptions as well. And so that's why what I believe is we should do something so that the board gets a chance to dig into the portfolios so that we have a very solid understanding of what we would want Future IQ to do to help us with those scenarios.
I 100% agree with you on that. Yeah.
Okay.
The public input side lining up with the citizenry is easy. That's just asking them to match up the demographic planning or the demographics of what they get in the survey versus what they actually get in the survey, right? In other words, you ask them to match up the census data to what you get from your actual survey. That part for the public input part is easy. You know, my thing on that is I think the public input part, because we've gotten so little, if none so far over a year, I think is really important. You know, the scenario planning part is a whole other story to me.
Well, I'm not sure what to read into that. The purpose of that contract is to complete the scenario planning. So I'm going to assume that you agree that that's an important deliverable out of that contract.
Jeff, can we get a head start or create a broad outline of what the scenario planning should be? So we have been living and breathing this for a year now. Why would we assume that David would know more about this than us?
Yeah, my assumption is David will know more about this than us, and my assumption is David would have in fact, if you read through that contract, he's got some. I
haven't seen the contract, so sorry. That's presumptuous on your part.
It's on our. Isn't that Tiffany? Isn't that on our SharePoint site?
It is.
Yeah, Patrick. It's a smart city document.
Okay.
It's on the
Okay,
SharePoint site.
I can look. Then I can pull it up. Okay, sorry, I hadn't seen that.
It was on the last agenda too, so that if you click on the link.
Oh, right. Okay, yes, I did see that. Sorry.
So, Ramesh, there are some bullet points in there which sort of describe the specific approach that Future IQ takes to scenario planning. Public input's a significant component of that, but they also have this concept of desktop research that they do to establish the trends that they would present to the public for feedback. So with that process, with that, we would be fed planning assumptions that we could base our articulation for the portfolios on. I do think it's important for us to act in such a way where we can have a consistent, appreciation across the board on the importance of doing that to get well-defined portfolios that we can base our advisement onto the City Council. And maybe the only way to do that is to dig into those portfolios. Maybe the only way to do that is to dig in and start doing that definition so that we can each look at it and say, oh, okay, here's the gap that needs to be filled, and here's where the board's going to need help filling that gap. Where I think scenario planning would fill that gap. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So could we move to the next agenda item? Have we exhausted our conversation, at least for now, at least at this point, on future IQ scenario planning?
I'm just going to get a level of clarity for me. So my action out of the delay is during the delay time to get representative information on how we would get public input in that process, as well as more specifics in the scope related to maybe the desktop research as well. Is that what we're...
I think that'd be useful for the board, Jared. Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, more details in general, all the way around through that proposal.
And maybe we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting, run that by the board, and have further discussion about those details. At the same time that we're digging into the portfolios so that we can understand ourselves where we feel like we may have a gap to fill and need help so that we can move forward and make sure that we get the best advisement possible to the City Council.
Thank you.
Let me add one more piece of reiteration there, which is basically, Jared, that's the same thing we asked for a month ago.
Well, I apologize then, because the clarity from me coming out of that was no-go delay, but we didn't take an action one way or the other. So, which is why
we also still haven't taken an action this evening.
We voted to delay,
right?
And we're saying, Patrick, that let's move forward so that the board can get a consistent understanding of what has to happen to fill out these portfolios.
I agree with that.
Okay, good. Is everybody ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Yes.
I heard a healthy yes there. Okay. Next agenda item is to discuss the agenda for February 1 and discuss preparations. This is an open discussion here, guys.
I'm going to jump in to clarify the question related to subcommittees. I believe based on this agenda item, we are okay to discuss that, as that would potentially impact the February 1 meeting. If you want to bring that topic up for discussion.
Well, could you repeat that, Jared? I'm sorry.
So we had Michelle brought up in an email potential of, and we started down that path earlier in the clarity around subcommittees. This is where we wanted to separate that out. This would be the agenda item. If we wanted to discuss that, we could, as it could potentially impact the February 1 meeting.
Right. Michelle, would you like to give us a little bit more color background on that topic?
Well, so one of the things I was talking to Aaron the other day is how to, as a whole, we have like 8 or 9 members in one meeting, and it's a lot of talent, right? So if we break that down into a group of 2 to 3, and work on those individual activities, items that we talked about, like we have like 8 items, right? Maybe we'll have more productive, quarterly meeting, like everybody gets their stuff done and then present what we have found, and then go on the next round again. So that's the idea, is break it down, and the meeting will be less formal. We don't have to follow the structure that we're creating motion, posting the agenda in 72 hours before our meeting.
So you can't get around any of those rules. Those rules always apply to any public meeting here in Texas. Those rules, you're not going to get around those rules.
About smaller subcommittees. We're talking about 3 and under. It's the subcommittees for the pillars.
Right.
We're having the meetings discussing our pillars rather than taking all year, or the number of meetings that we were looking at. It was going to take a substantial amount of time. So if we break that down with subcommittees and replace a monthly meeting with a subcommittee, we could potentially get further faster.
Is an example of that, Aaron and Moshul, like Jeff, I know that you had asked a board meeting or 2 ago of people to say, hey, I'm interested in deep diving on that portfolio. So is that an example where, Aaron, you and Moshul might get one other person, or maybe the 2 of you guys would go off and do that work and then bring it back? Is that just an example of what you're saying?
That's exactly right. That's where the idea came from, is because we're talking about creating this portfolio, and there we have 6 topics, right? And each has 1 primary and 1 secondary at least, so we can have 2 to 3 members in each subcommittee work on those items and go a lot of detail and do a lot of research, maybe virtual session, and kind of come up with a draft and present it for everybody to discuss on that. And that way we're pretty much utilizing everybody's time in more efficient manner, right? And getting there faster. Because the current trajectory, the plan is let's work on this, and then I believe each item you allocated 3 months, right, Jeff? Is that right?
Yeah, I sketched out a plan that I felt like, probably more like 6 to 7 months, Moshe.
Right. So if we break it down in subcommittees, I think we will for sure get there between 2 to 6 months. But if we have this large meeting, I have kind of doubt we may be able to get there or not.
One thing is I think when we started out on this board, I probably would have jumped in, Mojul, and said, man, we could get a lot done in these subcommittees and we could go faster. But what I have learned through this process is the deliberation that happens with all of the board members, the fact that that deliberation is there's a mechanism for the public to have access to that deliberation in these meetings. To me, I've just learned I think that's valuable. And my concern would be that in a subcommittee meeting, there'd be deliberation that would go on, even at 3 members, that if that deliberation takes place in this full board meeting, then we all weigh in on it. We all get a chance to, it may go somewhere where if it was in the full board meeting, it wouldn't go, And so while you might look at it at first and say, well, we could save time, I don't know. We might also add time, because then when you come back in the full board meeting, if there's deliberation that's going to happen, then the full board may have to go back over that, may have to say, hold on, how did you come up with that? I've come to value the public debate that occurs in these meetings. Not that I didn't value it before, but I thought subcommittees would be a good idea. Now, going through the process that we've gone through, I'm kind of skeptical about subcommittees being a good idea. Now, being able to get the task of the board done and being able to move as quickly as we can, I'm really interested in that. And I'm just kind of wondering if perhaps when we, in the December 7th meeting, maybe I'm jumping forward a little bit here, but in the December 7th meeting, we talked about grouping up to do the data exploration and then doing the discussion about what the transformation for this would be required for the city, and coming up with these bullet items of, we would go to the city council with start this by this year, do this over the next 18 months, and do this before year 2030, those kind of bullet items. Well, if 2 people, and maybe we can have a conversation about it even being 3 people, but I think 2 people make sense. If 2 people do all the data exploration and present that back to the board, I think we might be able to make good progress without subcommittees when we look at that data and then dig into the transformation statement and these bullet items, these timeframes between now and 2040. And so again, just to kind of reiterate, while I've just come to really value the public debate that occurs here, and I think if 2 people, like we talked about before, if 2 people dig into that data exploration, it's not a subcommittee, but it certainly is 2 people doing all the data collection together and presenting it as a story back to this board, so that then we can do that deliberation on the next steps from that data, if you will. I think that would. I'm hopeful that will work to move things along at a fairly good pace, but not cut off any sort of and not put board members in a risky position, for example, where deliberation might occur outside of the board meeting, which is something I don't think we want to risk. And I'm stating that as a board member. I'm not, that would be my initial view.
All right. So, what does anyone else want to have their opinion on this?
So here's my question on this, and I don't know how this goes, and I know we don't have people on OMA and TPIA and the rest, so. And I don't know how this goes. And Jared, you may have to ask about this. And I do this, and I say this working as someone who works in a collaborative data environment for what Jeff just said. And he's like, well, if 2 people analyze the data and they come back and present the results to the board, is that okay? So if Jeff and I shared the data we got on something about smart sensors in the city, and we did the analysis, and we said, hey, these new smart sensors are really awesome. We should use these on these traffic sensors or on these squad cars or whatever. And then we send an email link of this to Moshel, who sends it to you. Like, are we suddenly out of violation at that point? And that's the part of it, without the public input, without the public sharing, I think we probably are. I mean, Aaron, you may have some input on this with us. I know you're an attorney. But it's just one of these things we've got to be really sensitive to on how we do this, because all of us work in these technology areas where we're used to sharing everything. We're used to, we're writing a proposal for this new thing, and we're going to do a Google Doc thing, and we're going to share the link on the Google Doc. That doesn't work in the environment of being on this board. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah, I don't think that was being proposed by Moshel and Aaron.
Well, but I'm trying to understand where the limit is, Todd. Like, because I heard 2, but what leads you? You can go from 2 to 3 really easily there.
Sure. So,
well, I thought we had already agreed to 2 people doing the data exploration, though. I don't think anyone's proposing to go beyond that.
Yeah. So the ask really of everyone here is to do data exploration. It's really, we're asking you to come forward at your chosen day to present the data that you find and then deliberate in the meeting. That's the context that I understand in which we're going for today. Yeah. We do have the SharePoint side and the ability to upload articles as finished documents. If there is what I would say is not a document that you personally have drafted, but if there is an article you want to share related to the smart sensors that Patrick mentioned, or some topic, then there's a written article, you can put that onto the SharePoint, which we can all access and review as part of our research and preparation for the meeting that would discuss that topic. So that is ultimately a way to achieve that. Moshel and Aaron could be assigned a topic. You are posting links into the page related to that topic for the discussion at the next meeting, and so forth and so on, right, as we go down the path. That gives the biggest. So I think what the biggest concern that I hear from Jeff and from Ashley in general, and we hear it as public servants a lot, is things happen behind closed doors, and we just don't want that perception, right? So it's easier to just have the deliberation in this meeting, so we can all have it on record and it's all there, and we can all say we agree or didn't agree on the information that we discussed. But research, at the end of the day, that is, to me, research is exactly what we've asked of you already. When you signed up, you volunteered for service. You're going to provide your knowledge based on the research you may have already done and the knowledge that you have, or research you're willing to go obtain and bring forward for us to talk about. So,
and I think, just as the lawyer of the group, I agree with Patrick. It just gives me a little bit of heartburn. That's just my 2 cents there.
And that's what
Aaron,
I am not a lawyer.
Right.
Aaron, did you agree with my comments?
I did, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's good.
So for my clarity, Moshel and Aaron, what I heard you guys say is you think there's a quicker way to get through these portfolio works is basically the problem I hear you trying to solve, right? And the solution was having a subcommittee go do that work and then bring it back to the board at a quarterly standpoint as opposed to monthly. So that's what I heard you guys say. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's essentially work we're being asked to do volunteering to do already.
Right.
And so we were looking at carving it out more formally or informally, but subcommittees in place of the cadence of a normal meeting. And if two of us are to get together and formalize our analysis of a pillar, then we can bring it back to the team in a more succinct manner and get through more of them, more pillars in a day.
Got it.
Our goal, we had a conversation about, other boards have subcommittees, some meet quarterly, some meet monthly. And in the context of what we're trying to accomplish, is there a way that we can do it? 'Cause at the end of the day, Jeff put in a tremendous amount of effort into his presentation. And so how are we as board members going to collaborate to put that much effort into future presentations? And so that's kind of where the conversation started. Yeah. And where we're trying to go is trying to figure out how do we get that level of input amongst each other.
And what I heard Jeff say, and what we've been doing is, we were looking. Jeff and I had asked for those to choose for portfolio to do, and then come back on a monthly basis. So actually what I'm hearing, and I may be wrong, but what I hear you guys talking about and proposing is not that much different than the workflow that we were going to do. It would just be coming back on a monthly basis for a portfolio, whether it was one person or two persons that came together to drive that work. And it would come back to our meetings. We'd have a section on the agenda where we come back and talk about where that person, or Moshe and Aaron, for example, are towards presenting that back. So I actually think we're pretty close to getting it done. I don't think we need to formalize and have subcommittees on this. I think basically, if we go through the cadence that we put together, which is, Moshe and Aaron, you guys choose the one that you want to do, and know that, there's going to be a section in next month's board meeting to bring it back. That might be a good place to say, hey, here we are, we're only 50% done. We're running into 2 roadblocks. We'd like to get your input on these roadblocks, and say, hey, we're going to bring it back the following month. Like, I see that as a great way for us to work and use our collective talents of why we're on this board, but then bring it back so it's publicly available. It can be looked at. It can be scrutinized by anyone in the public, which is what we want. And we're moving towards the solution. So that's what I hear, which is I think we've got a pretty good path as currently stated. We need a couple people per portfolio to do the work.
To do the data exploration.
Sorry, the data exploration. Sorry, that's the work I'm describing. Yes.
And then as a board, we would do the transformation statement and the planning bullets. Yeah. And those will be tough board meetings to get those things done. But I think we'll all have the opportunity to pitch in and get it done.
So Aaron, Michelle, did I state that correctly? I mean, does this accomplish what you were kind of wanting to do, as opposed to going to something quarterly? I mean, it may take a quarter to do all that data work, just depending on how it goes. But I still think it's valuable for us to come back on a monthly basis and roll through that. Does that achieve what you're hoping to achieve?
I think the monthly is, the amount of work it's going to take per topic, and having this monthly meeting, then we're being asked to individual topic, and then when we're participating in all these meetings, that may actually kind of put extra burden, and we may not be able to accomplish all the milestones for the individual topic that we're talking about. That is my concern, is monthly not enough, and then when we're actually getting to the meeting, that's putting that extra burden on each board members. That's what I think.
So my thought to that, and then I'll step aside, is, Moshul, I could not agree with you more on how do we move faster and get work done. The amount of times Jeff and I have had discussions like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get all this work done when we only meet monthly? It's just been that has been a learning process to walk through. So I totally understand that. Jeff, I think you brought up a point, and I think it's a good one, which is if we come back monthly and go through it, I think that's a part of our process. And if we try it for a month or two and we're quote unquote failing and we feel like as a board we're kind of failing, I think that's a great time for us to like say, man, we're going to have to come up with a different way to do this and figure it out. I might just recommend let's work with this process and, maybe just set an internal deadline for us and say by March, how are we doing? I think those are good discussion points. Anyway, I'll stop. That's my thought.
Sounds reasonable to me, Todd.
Yeah, I agree, Todd.
Fair enough.
All right, so we continue on for February 1 meeting.
Yeah, and if we continue with the cadence that we discussed in the last meeting, that what we would do is in the February 1 meeting, we would revisit the Smart City climate change portfolio. We would probably really quickly go back through the data exploration that we already did, but pretty quickly. And what would happen is, I believe Aaron and Ramesh volunteered for that portfolio. So you guys would prepare additional data exploration. You would look at the kinds of things that, and this is a really important point here, the kinds of things that smart cities are doing when it comes to climate change, not just generally what cities are doing when it comes to climate change, but what's the smart city relevant solutions, approaches that are being taken, and you would come back and say, well, here's what we were able to explore, put that on the table for the board, and we would have a debate about among all of those of that data. Then we would debate, well, what are the planning assumptions that we ought to make? What transformation would that require of Coppell? And what do we think is reasonable between now and 2040 in terms of, let's call it planning milestones? And there is no way that we would finish that debate on February 1. There's no way. Or let's call it exploration rather than debate. But I do think it would be useful to get started on it. And then make sure that we have 2 people assigned to each portfolio so that everyone's always looking forward to saying, well, I need to pay attention to this topic on behalf of the board so that I can say, look, here's the data that I think is most relevant for each of these portfolios. So what we would do in the February 1 meeting is we'd do the climate change portfolio, then we turn around and we would look at all the other portfolios, and we'd make sure that we had at least 2 people assigned to each. And what I'm hearing, and I would want everyone to agree with this, but if there is a portfolio where we had 3 people that were interested in it, then what I heard from Ashley is that's okay. And if 3 people had to coordinate on the data exploration piece, that would be all right. That as long as no deliberation took place, that would be fine from an OMA perspective. So if everyone agrees with that, then I think we'll proceed that way on the February 1 meeting, and then adjust as we go. And then at a future meeting, I think what we'll find is that we'll find research gaps. I just don't think that the board can do enough data exploration to fill all the gaps. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about, well, let's dig into details of what Future IQ could help us to fill that gap. So when we have a better feel for what that gap looks like, then we'll revisit the Future IQ engagement topic. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
It does, and let me add one thing. So, Jared, I've been really negative about the Future IQ thing, and I've done it for 2 meetings in a row. And my biggest thing is I want to understand how they're going to come back and engage in the era of COVID.
Received.
Right. So I really want to understand if we're going to go that route and we're going to say, okay, we're going to use a consultant to engage in this and we're going to do it in the next 6 months. Like, I really need to understand how they're going to come in and do that, because as a social scientist, like, the kind of engagement they would normally do in terms of focus groups and surveys and the rest is really, really hard to do.
Okay. I will make sure that I get as much detail as I can.
Thank you. And if you want to communicate separately with me about that outside of the group, so we're not doing the 3-person engagement, whatever, outside of it, like, send me a separate email if you hear something from them. But I'm like, I already am skeptical on them given their perspectives, and I'm super skeptical in COVID. So that's why I'm kind of pushing this, and I've pushed it the last 2 meetings.
Understood. Yeah.
15-minute warning, Jeff.
I appreciate your understanding, Jared.
Quick question for Tiffany. Tiffany, where is the data on the climate change? Is it on the SharePoint? And I'm looking at the SharePoint. I'm not seeing it.
Let me see.
And if you want to send Aaron and me a separate email, that's fine. I don't want to take too much of time. I just like to.
Yeah, I'll look at that and send you guys an email.
Thank you.
So I had trouble finding something in that folder the other day. What I'm going to do is we're going to try to come away and just create folders for the portfolios individually, so it makes it easy for per topic to find what we're looking for, and hopefully that'll make it easier. So, little organization.
Okay, very good. We're nearing our end time. We've got a few more minutes here. Is there anything anything else that anybody has to say about our agenda for the next meeting and the discussion we had about process?
I have a quick clarification. So in terms of meeting the expectations for next meeting, so Aaron and I, either together or individually, we will put our findings together. So how much time do we have to present it? I just want to make sure that we're managing the time effectively. And if you guys have any questions that you want to send to me and Aaron in advance, please do so. And we'll try not to, I'll speak for myself. I'll try not to disappoint Aaron and the rest of you.
Just for clarity, if you'll forward those questions through Tiffany, that would be fantastic.
Yes. And Ramesh, you can have as much time as you want for the next board meeting. I would say for a good, healthy debate, we ought to assume 1 hour. Mm-hmm. And if you want less or you want more, whenever that agenda goes out, please just ask. When Tiffany sends the agenda out, just ask her for a change if you want more time or less time. Okay.
But for planning purposes, Jeff, you're saying let's go ahead and plan for an hour.
Yeah.
And then anything else around that we'll kind of build. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Makes sense.
And remember, Aaron, Ramesh, we'll have plenty of debate on. It's not like you have to have a presentation for an hour. There'll be plenty of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, within the hour, you'll refresh on some of the stuff you presented, Jeff. We'll present some new ideas for discussion amongst the group, which could take a good chunk of the time.
Yep, and we'll all learn from that and move forward.
Okay.
So don't think it's got to be perfect.
One thought I have, Jeff, is just for Aaron B. and Caitlin's thought process as the first meeting, thinking, oh my gosh, is every meeting like this? I think one of the great takeaways from this meeting is that all of the kind of structural work, things of like how we're going to operate, I mean, that took quite a while. We built a lot of stuff. And we built a lot of stuff. And according to the city, and according to the city, we did it so lightning fast, it was applauded. But we're really in a second phase here. We're in a second phase where, like, you know, these portfolios are being brought back to the board so we can work on and debate, as you just said. I mean, this is really kind of a second phase for us. And it's exciting, honestly, because, you know, it's taken us a while to kind of get to this point. And I just think it's a great phase that we're in. So, you know, Aaron, I'm a pretty perfectionist, and knowing you the way I know you, you're not going to, I think what you bring back is going to be fantastic, and, you know, we're going to learn and grow from it, you know, so I don't think anybody's expectations is that it's going to be completely perfect on presentation one. And I think we're going through the right kind of process is my thought on all of this.
Sounds good, Todd. Hey, another thing I'd like to bring up is when we had the December meeting, we asked, are there any changes going forward that should be considered? And one thing that was brought up, two things were brought up. One was that in the agenda, each agenda, we should have an agenda item for new learnings. And there was some conversation about making sure as we move along that we're constantly learning and we're sharing new ideas between ourselves. And so please expect on the agenda for February 1 that there will be maybe a 20-minute agenda item. I don't know, maybe it's longer, maybe it's 30 minutes, but please expect an agenda item that will basically be what new things have we learned about smart cities, so that anything that comes up during the month that someone sees, someone reads, anything at all, maybe something that you've heard, I was going to say at a conference or something like that, at a virtual conference or whatever the case might be. Jot it down and bring it up so that we can all learn together. So please expect that on the agenda. And the other thing that was brought up was to make sure that learning is facilitated by having speakers. And I don't think we'll have a speaker at the February 1 meeting, but there are a couple of people that I ran across when I was doing the climate change research, and one is a gentleman that lives here in Coppell that has gone to Al Gore's climate change action training and goes around DFW to talk to people about companies, and I assume perhaps government organizations about climate change. And this gentleman might be an interesting person to speak to us sometime. So if we can work that out for February 1, I'll make sure and send that to Tiffany so she can get it on the agenda and everybody can see that. But please expect that to see the what new things have people learned on the agenda, so that we can share that with each other. And from time to time, please expect to see speakers on the agenda as well. Okay. Any additional conversation about agenda and process and getting the preps done for February 1 meeting? Yeah. Okay. So do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening?
Motion.
Aaron moves that we adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. So let's take a vote. All in favor of adjourning the meeting? All right, very good. The meeting is adjourned, and we are adjourning at 8:24. Thank you, everybody, for the meeting this evening. Thanks for all the input and the conversation. And please know everybody's appreciated.
Thank you.
You guys,
Bye,
you guys,
Hi, guys.
Good to see you
Good
all.
night.
Bye.
Okay. Good night.
Bye.